Hi everyone. Today I am delighted to bring you a chat about understanding gender with Dr. Anvita Madan-Bahel, who has been a practicing psychotherapist for the last 15 years, and the majority of her work is around gender disparities, psychosexual and relational therapy, reducing gender violence, mental health, and diversity training. Hi, Anvita. How are you?
Hello, I'm well, thank you.
I'm delighted to have you here today because this topic is such a hard topic. And as I was explaining, for a lot of us, when we were taught basic biology in school, we were taught about two genders.
Right.
So, so to us, to some of us, I think to the above 35s, this topic is very, very uh, new. So thank you for being here with us.
Thank you. It is, and I think it is confusing. And, at the outset, as we talk about gender, if we stop thinking about gender as something biological and something that is physiological or biological, but something that is a social construct, that is something that is created. I think it changes it. It makes it easier for everybody to understand. This is something that was socially constructed. And I think people today are saying, we want a new social construction. Like that one doesn't work for a lot of younger generation. Yeah.
Right. Now tell me, not understanding this particular topic is causing a lot of distress to a lot of people. And I've heard from people that there's 23 genders, there's 100 genders. And I also heard from a lot of people I know that it's causing a lot of friction with the children. So people sort of over 35, over 40, and then there's the youngsters who've just grown up in a different world from us. So can you give me a basic explanation of gender identity?
Yeah, and I think let's start there with some basic things, because terms that I might use are, cisgender, which is roles that traditional people believe in, male and female. So they are called cisgenders.
Mhm.
And, just the way we think of who has hierarchy and who has, power, basically, the world works with cisgender people, right? The male and female in some ways. And so they're on the top of the hierarchy, and people who have different gender identities are saying that they are minority and it's really difficult for them. But first, let me just backtrack and explain. When we started talking, you spoke about how we were taught that gender is something that's biological, it is male or female. And let me introduce this idea that problem with gender is that we've always been shown, or it's been seen as something that is binary. It's one or the other. So the first definition of gender we always start with is biological sex. So what are the chromosomes that you're born with? Is it XX or XY, right? So people think it's binary. If anything that people can take away from this, talk, is that if we can start thinking of gender on a continuum, like if you think about it on a continuum rather than it is one or the other, what we know is that there are people who have chromosomes that could be XXY or XO, and like they're called the middle sex people. And so
Now,
once again,
I'm sorry to interrupt you here, Anvita, but I don't think everyone knows that.
so middle sex is what in the, as in they are given a lot of names, but there are people who might have no male or female reproductive organs, or no organs, or both organs. There are people who are born with multiple reproductive organs, not just male or female. So sometimes they have to make a choice as to which one they want to retain or which one they want to give up. Sometimes they are born with none, so they have to decide which one they will get constructed. So all I'm trying to explain is that this idea that it's binary is not true. And there's a beautiful book called Middle Sex, which explains about somebody's journey. But as you can see, this is the continuum. The next thing, so this is biological sex. We've stop the myth that it's binary. Second is the idea there is something known as gender identity. Once again, we see it as, oh, there can only be a male and there can only be a female. But we're introducing the idea once again that it's on a continuum. It's just not binary where it's only male and only female. So if it's on the continuum, and then there's some people saying, I actually don't identify as being male or female, and I want to identify as gender non-binary. And gender non-binary means they don't want to be seen as a male or a female. They are saying that they're gender neutral, maybe is another word that people would have said, but gender non-binary is more the word that they want to identify with. And the Billions character Taylor Mason really made it, in popular culture, and she identifies as one, and they tend to use the pronouns they, them. So once again, they're saying this doesn't fit us, this male female, like the gender identity, once again on the continuum. And I will talk more about their experience, because if we can think about things on the continuum, but more as a river, so it's flowing and it's changing, rather than, oh, it's on the continuum and if you land somewhere, that's permanent again. This permanency is problematic. What they're saying is that one day I can wake up and I can feel very femme, someday I can wake up and feeling very male, someday I can wake up feeling not gender non-binary. Like, stop putting these boxes that say, if you choose this, that's it, for lifelong, this is what it is. And they're saying, give it more fluidity, give it a continuum. And then the next thing that we can think about, so like I've done now biological sex, which is physiological. I've done male, female, and then it's gender expression. And what is gender expression? How masculine or feminine somebody is. And once again, that also is on a continuum. And maybe this is something that people can relate with more, because all of us have hated the fact that somebody has turned around and said, oh, why are you behaving like a woman? Or why are you behaving like a lady? Or why are you behaving like a man? Like, men do this, women don't do this. This idea of masculinity and femininity is something that we're familiar with, and we don't like it, right? And we don't want to be constricted. So once again, a continuum on which we land wherever we feel like landing. And as most of us will know, some days we can wake up and say, oh, I'm feeling so feminine and I want to wear a dress and I want to wear makeup. And once again, societal norms of what feminine means. So I must say that. But there are other things that we might want to do in that day. Is like, so many people will want to say, I want to go and do construction or ride a bike in a dress. This idea that you can't do those things. This is what we, as in, if you can take away this idea that gender is not binary, but on a continuum and something that's fluid.
Now, also, can you explain to us what is the difference between the biological body and the psychological body? So the body that you were born with, and what happens if you feel different?
Yeah, so if we go back to the continuums, right? In some ways, what we're saying is that, okay, I had a biological body that was born with a chromosome XX or XY. However, my gender identity or gender expression, feeling wise, I feel the opposite. So say somebody was born with a female body, so breast and vagina, but they feel this doesn't feel right. So feeling wise, they feel more male, they feel more masculine, they feel more complete when they express themselves with masculinity or maleness. So they really feel like this body is a wrong body in some ways. And they want to transition. So the word transgender, is this idea that they're transitioning from one gender to another. So even in this community, how much someone wants to transition is a personal choice. Like, some people feel really happy just cross-dressing, so they will lead their lives during the day being a woman. At night they would cross dress as a man, or somebody else might say, no, I want the cross dressing, I want the hormones, I want the changes in the body, and I want a penis reconstruction, so I want my body completely to change. So how much transition and what feels enough for somebody or helps them feel contentment or at peace is an individual choice. So there can be a lot of diversity even within the trans community.
One of the one of the questions that I've had about this for the last 6 months is this issue about how do you address somebody. So the way I've understood it is just, and I have young daughters and they've taught me a lot. And that is just to ask. And I find that in my daughter's company, they all write their pronouns under the names now, So if you just ask, is that okay?
Absolutely. And so I want to share a story because this is few years ago, and I think people are fearful and they feel like, oh, what is this? I don't understand it. It's lifelong wisdom. Why are people changing it? Yes, it is scary, but there are a lot of things that now are unacceptable, which were acceptable like 20 years ago, right? So yes, this is the transition period and you will get it wrong, but people can see if you're trying. And my favorite story is that this is something that I learned a few years ago. And then obviously I worked with gender a lot, but it was mostly around transgender and gender, but the gender non-binary. And I had watched something on the Billions character, Taylor Mason, and gender non-binary. And I was like, oh, I need to read up about this. And the next day when I went to teach at a college, one of the students identified as gender non-binary. And in my head, all that went around was, there was something about how they want to be addressed. What was it? How will I do it? Will I get it wrong? Will I, really make it uncomfortable to them? What would happen? And I just asked, I said, so how would you like to be identified? They said they would be like to be called they. And in my head, I was sure that I would mess it up because, your language is so she, you, and everything that his. So I just made a bit of an effort to make sure I was not addressing them as she or a he, like that was the main, I think, effort that I put in. And I used everything else that was present for me in the moment, but I just made sure that I didn't call them by the she or the he. I might have called them they, I might have called them you, or by their name, or anything that I used. And it was tough. I'm not saying it wasn't tough because you have to really watch out for it. But I must have done something there, and I'm sure I made mistakes, but I think they must have seen my intention of effort. Because I had only met the student twice, and few months later, of no contact, he approached me and said, oh, I'm going to another college, can you write a reference letter? And I was touched, but at the same time I was like, I've only met you twice. But in that intention, I think, or in that trying to do something that makes them feel comfortable, I obviously did something right. So just try. Don't feel like you can't, you'll make mistakes, but they'll teach you also. But if you keep making the same mistake, I think that's what becomes frustrating.
I love your story. Thank you for sharing. Do you have any advice for people? Any last words of wisdom?
Idea that sexual orientation actually has nothing to do with gender, and most people get really confused with that idea. And that's because it was always LGBTQ, and the T was part of the community. And I first learned about it when I started studying in Minnesota, and I had somebody who identified as a lesbian, and she was going to do gender, and she said, can I get the T from the LGBT and put it with gender? So the T is a gender identity. Sexual orientation, the LGBTQ is who do we want to have sex with, or who are we attracted to romantically or sexually. T is a gender identity. And I think it was part of the community because the politics was very similar, the rights were very similar, the struggles were very similar. So, yes, there is a strong affinity. But I think because what you have to understand is that somebody can be transgender, or somebody can be, identify as something else and still identify as lesbian or gay or bisexual or something. So there are two identities, two separate identities. So I just wanted to leave that thought. And my final thought would be, the problem is the boxes. People don't want those restrictions. They want to be able to pick and choose, rather than be stuck in, this is what we are. They want to be able to do different things, because a lot of times we are not able to actually make choices that feel right for us because of these gender impositions. So breaking the boxes and allowing for the fluidity, and not getting really caught up in, oh, but they were this yesterday, but they were this yesterday, they were this yesterday. Just be respectful of where they are today and who they are today. They're not asking you to change. They're not asking you to become a different gender or whatever. But if that feels right to them, if that feels, complete to them, think about how much pressure, mockery, ridicule, stereotype, bias they face, but they still make those choices of being gender non-binary or transgender or otherwise. Must be such an important identity for them to make those choices. I think if we go with that sentiment, I think the respect comes automatically, because we have empathy then for how important this is to them. So rather than questioning it, try understanding it and supporting it.
That was beautifully put, really beautifully put. And the one thing, again, you made a very important point at the end, that gender and sexual orientation are different. Because I think, again, because of the LGBTQ, people have got confused and they think it's the same thing. So that is a very, very important thing we're all going to go away with. And yes, when you're saying, the empathy and the respect is so important. So thank you, Anvita. That was such an incredibly enlightening talk. And thank you for being here today and helping us all in our journey. And thank you, everyone, for attending. I hope you found it useful. This is Anshu Bahanda at Wellness Curated, talking to Dr. Anvita Madan-Bahel.